Actually, I had to make another movie before they started. Because of the success of that movie, I thought, well, maybe this guy can make this movie work.
You've seen Back to the Future. You know the clock tower, the DeLorean, the flux capacitor. It feels like a film you already understand, but there's one scene most people never look at closely enough. Hidden inside it is a detail that quietly changes how the entire story works, something that's been there from the beginning, hiding in plain sight. Once you see it, the film doesn't play the same way again. But before we get into it, how many times have you watched Back to the Future? Drop your honest number in the comments section. Now, join us as we break it all down and prepare to be shocked. The peculiarity of the opening scene. Before Marty McFly even appears on screen, the opening shot of Back to the Future is doing an enormous amount of work. The camera pans slowly across Doc Brown's cluttered workshop, moving across dozens of ticking clocks that are all perfectly synchronized. The clocks all read the same time. But here's the first thing most people miss. Every single one of those clocks is running exactly 25 minutes slow. This is not an accident. Doc confirmed it on the phone with Marty moments later, saying the clocks are exactly 25 minutes slow and that this means Marty is late for school. The entire collection of clocks in Doc's house is wrong by precisely 25 minutes.
It's 8 o'clock.
Perfect! I swear it worked! They're all exactly 25 minutes slow!
Which is a very specific kind of wrong that suggests an experiment rather than neglect. The implication sitting underneath the surface is that Doc has already been messing with time at the domestic level long before he builds a time machine out of a DeLorean. But the clocks are only the surface layer of what the opening shot is doing. If you pause on any single frame of that pan and look carefully, one of the clocks features a tiny figurine of a man dangling from its hands. A man hanging from a clock face. This is a direct visual reference to the 1923 silent comedy Safety Last, in which comedian Harold Lloyd dangles from a giant clock high above a city street in one of cinema history's most recognizable images. Most people who grew up watching Back to the Future in the 1980s had no idea what the Harold Lloyd reference meant. It did not matter, because the figurine was not there to be identified. It was there to foreshadow. At the end of the film, Doc Brown hangs from the hands of the Hill Valley Clock Tower in almost exactly the same position as the figurine in his own house. The opening shot of the film contains a miniature preview of the final act in the background of a clock collection, and it has been sitting there in plain sight for 40 years, waiting for people to notice it. The opening scene also contains a newspaper clipping in the background that most viewers walk straight past. If you pause and look at the papers scattered around Doc's workshop, you can find a clipping about a mansion burning down. This is the quiet backstory of who Doc Brown is and how he ended up living in a converted garage. He used to own an enormous family mansion. It burned down at some point before the events of the film. The insurance money from the mansion, combined with proceeds from selling the surrounding land that was then developed into commercial properties, is the implied source of the personal fortune Doc poured into building the time machine. The movie never stops to explain any of this. It just put a newspaper clipping in a cluttered workshop and trusted that some viewers would pause long enough to read it. Now let's get to the moment that most people have seen and still do not fully understand, because the mall has two names and most people only notice one of them. The secret's hiding in the Twin Pines Mall scene. When Marty arrives at the Twin Pines Mall parking lot at 1:15 in the morning to meet Doc and see the time machine for the first time, the mall sign is clearly visible in the background. Twin Pines Mall. Two words that function as pure scene-setting detail that nobody pays attention to, because why would you? Marty is about to see a DeLorean become a time machine. Nobody is reading mall signs, but the writers knew that. They counted on it. When Doc first unveils the DeLorean in that parking lot, he mentions almost in passing that the land used to belong to a farmer named Old Man Peabody, who had, in Doc's words, this crazy idea about breeding pine trees, two trees, on a farm, on the land where the Twin Pines Mall was eventually built.
Old Man Peabody owned all of it. He had this crazy idea about breeding pine.
The mall is named after those two trees. Now Marty goes back to 1955 and the DeLorean crashes onto Old Man Peabody's farm. Peabody chases him with a shotgun. Marty floors it and, in the process of escaping, drives over one of the two baby pine trees at the entrance to the property. He is gone before he even registers what he has done. When Marty returns to the parking lot of that same mall at the end of the film, the sign in the background now reads Lone Pine Mall, not Twin Pines. Because one of the two trees that gave the place its name is gone, destroyed by Marty in 1955, 30 years before the mall was built. The sign change is the first signal that Marty's trip to 1955 permanently altered the world he returned to. It happens in the background. Most people do not catch it on a first viewing. Most people who have seen the film dozens of times and know the details still feel something when they notice it again. The broken ledge on the clock tower works the same way. When Marty first arrives in the original 1985 timeline at the beginning of the film and runs toward the clock tower to warn Doc, the ledge on the clock tower is intact, smooth, undamaged. Nobody has ever broken it. By the end of the film, when Doc is clinging to the clock to reconnect the lightning cable, his foot breaks off a chunk of the stone ledge during the effort. It falls. The camera does not linger on it. There are bigger things happening. When Marty returns to 1985 at the end and runs back to that parking lot, if you look at the clock tower in the background, the ledge is broken. The piece Doc knocked off in 1955 was never repaired. It is still missing 30 years later. The film you started watching has been permanently altered by the events of the film you just watched, and the proof is sitting in the background of two shots that most people do not think to compare. Now here is the scene that most people assume is pure comedy, but is actually doing something much more precise than it looks. The 7 minutes and 22 seconds that nobody counted. Near the end of the film, when Doc and Marty are scrambling to set up the lightning cable system that will send Marty home, Doc tells him exactly how long they have. 7 minutes and 22 seconds. From the moment Doc says those words, 7 minutes and 22 seconds of real screen time pass before the lightning strikes the clock tower, and Marty disappears back to 1985. The filmmakers timed it deliberately. The countdown Doc gives Marty is not a dramatic device that the editing then ignores for pacing purposes. It is a real countdown embedded into the structure of the film itself. If you start a stopwatch the moment Doc announces the time and stop it the moment the lightning strikes, you will land on 7 minutes and 22 seconds. The film is its own clock. This is the kind of detail that tells you something important about how seriously Zemeckis and Gale took the internal logic of the story. They were not just writing dialogue that sounded like it made sense. They were constructing a film that actually made sense at every level, including the temporal one. If the 7-minute countdown had not matched the real elapsed screen time, it would have been a small inconsistency that most people would never notice, and that would have mattered to nobody except the people who made it. They did it anyway and made it match, because the film was always supposed to be the kind of thing that rewarded people who paid that kind of attention. Let's talk about the scene that explains something every viewer has always assumed, but that the film actually plants the answer to in a completely different scene far earlier than you would expect. The detail hidden in the audition scene at the beginning. In the very first act of Back to the Future, Marty and his band, the Pinheads, audition to play at the school dance. They set up, they play, and a judge immediately cuts them off. The judge is played by Huey Lewis himself, the man whose song, The Power of Love, opens the film and whose music dominates the soundtrack.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud. Next, please.
The joke is that the man responsible for the film's most recognizable songs is the same man who tells the character performing those songs that he is not good enough. But the scene is also doing something structural that only becomes fully visible near the end of the film. When Marty finds himself at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance in 1955 and ends up performing Johnny B. Good with Marvin Berry's band, he starts normally and then slides into a wild, extended guitar solo that confuses and then delights the audience. He is playing in a style that nobody in 1955 has ever heard before. The crowd did not know how to process it. Some of them love it. Some of them look bewildered. Marty himself loses control of the performance for a moment, channeling every rock guitarist who will not be born for another decade. And when it is over, he stops and says, "I guess you guys are not ready for that yet, but your kids are gonna love it."
Can't guess you guys aren't ready for that yet. But your kids are gonna love it.
The guitar solo that gets away from him at the Enchantment Under the Sea is the same impulse that got his band rejected at the audition at the beginning of the film. He played too hard, went too far, and turned something that was supposed to be contained into something much bigger than the room can hold. The audition scene at the start is not just a joke about Huey Lewis. It is a character note about Marty that the film pays off at the dance in 1955. The audition and the dance performance are the same character moment in two different decades. One gets him rejected. One gets Chuck Berry a phone call from his cousin. Now, let's talk about the scene that most people read as pure humor, but that is actually one of the most carefully planted pieces of foreshadowing in the entire franchise. Doc's throwaway line about World Series wins is the entire plot of the second film. When Doc is demonstrating the DeLorean for the first time and explaining the possibilities of time travel, he runs through a rapid list of things you could theoretically do with the ability to move through time. He says he could go to the future and find out who wins the next 25 World Series. He says it quickly, as part of a breathless explanation, as a comic illustration of what time travel could enable. And then the scene moves on. In the context of the first film, the line is a throwaway joke. In the context of the trilogy, it is the complete setup for the entire plot of Back to the Future Part 2. In the sequel, the central conflict is driven by a sports almanac that contains the results of major sporting events across decades. Biff gets his hands on it, travels back to 1955, and gives it to his younger self, who then uses it to bet on sporting events he already knows the outcomes of, and becomes obscenely wealthy and powerful as a result. The Sports Almanac is the 25 World Series line from the first film, expanded into a 2-hour consequence. Doc Brown essentially described the plot mechanism of the second film in a single throwaway joke in the first one. Zemeckis and Gale confirmed the foreshadowing was intentional. They knew where the trilogy was going. They planted the seed in the scene where Doc reveals the machine. The joke is funnier on a second watch of Part 1 than it was the first time. And it is only funny the first time, because you do not know yet what it is pointing at. Now let's look at the thing that happens in the background of the final sequence that tells you more about Biff Tannen's psychology than any line of dialogue in the entire film. Biff is polishing George's car at the end, and the way he laughs tells you everything. The final sequence of Back to the Future is famously warm and satisfying. Marty returns to a 1985 that has been quietly improved by his time in 1955. His father is a confident, successful science fiction author instead of the meek, bullied man he was at the beginning of the film. The house is nicer, the car is a BMW instead of a beaten-up station wagon. Everything is better. And in the background of this sequence, working on that BMW in the driveway, is Biff Tannen. The man who spent decades bullying George McFly is now detailing George's car as some kind of service provider. The power dynamic has completely flipped. But what makes this scene genuinely extraordinary is what Biff is doing with his body while he works. If you watch carefully, Biff has adopted George McFly's nervous laugh.
Hello, anybody home? Think, McFly. Think.
In the original 1985, at the beginning of the film, George has a specific, reflexive, slightly ashamed little laugh that he does when he is uncomfortable or deferring to someone more powerful. By the end of the film, in the improved timeline, it is Biff who laughs like that. This is the kind of storytelling that most blockbuster films do not bother with, because most blockbuster films do not expect their audience to notice. Now, let's get to the scene that contains something almost nobody notices even after being told to look for it, because it appears for less than 2 seconds and has a specific reason for being there. The one shot of Eric Stoltz that made it into the final film. For 6 weeks of principal photography, the role of Marty McFly was played by Eric Stoltz, not Michael J. Fox. Eric was a serious, committed dramatic actor who could not find the comedic register the role required. He approached the film as a tragedy rather than a comedy, and after 6 weeks of footage, the director Robert Zemeckis made the painful decision to recast. Michael J. Fox was brought in, and the entire film was essentially shot again with him in the lead. The production worked exhaustively to ensure that no footage of Eric as Marty remained in the theatrical cut. Almost all of it was successfully removed. Almost all of it. There is one shot in the finished film where the figure on screen is Eric rather than Michael, and it survived the edit because of where it appears. During the scene where Biff and his gang are bullying someone, there is a very brief view of a figure whose face is not clearly visible, seen from a distance and at an angle that makes identification nearly impossible for casual viewing. That figure is Eric Stoltz. The production team knew it was there. They made a deliberate calculation that the angle and the brevity of the shot made it acceptable to leave in rather than spending the time and budget to reshoot it. Stoltz was gone from the film, except for that one frame. His footage from the production was kept private for 30 years before being included as bonus material on the anniversary edition, giving audiences their first full look at the film that almost was. Now the final detail, the one that has been sitting in plain sight since 1985, and that most people only notice when someone physically pauses the film and points directly at it. Every clock in the film is connected. Back to the Future is built around the concept of time, and the filmmakers took the commitment to that concept far deeper than anyone would have reasonably expected. The 25-minute slow clocks in Doc's house. The clock figurine that foreshadows the ending. The countdown that matches real elapsed time. The courthouse clock froze at 10:04 from the moment lightning struck it in 1955. But there is a layer of connection between all of these clocks that brings the whole thing together in a way that is either a remarkable coincidence or the most perfectly constructed piece of thematic clockwork in blockbuster cinema history. When Einstein returns from the first-time travel experiment at the beginning of the film, the clock on the wall of the parking lot reads 1:21 a.m. The DeLorean requires 1.21 gigawatts to achieve time travel. The clock reads 1:21 when the first successful jump is confirmed. The power requirement and the time of the confirmation are the same number. The film could have had Einstein return at 1:22 or 1:20 or any other time. The number displayed on the clock when history's first-time traveler comes home is the exact number of gigawatts his journey required. Whether this was planned from the beginning as a hidden detail for the attentive viewer or emerged from the production's extraordinary attention to internal consistency is something Zemeckis has acknowledged with a smile rather than a specific answer. Both possibilities are equally satisfying for different reasons. Which of these details genuinely hit you the hardest? And is there something in Back to the Future you have always noticed but never seen anyone else mention? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.